Going on, everybody, this is Jacob Viral. Today I'm going to show you a simple concept of how I pretty much tune my sealed section of my big fourth order. So you can use this concept for your fourth order if you have one. And of course, not just fourth order, sixth order, ported enclosure, anything. Any enclosure you're able to use this concept for. So all you're going to need is an SPL meter, you're going to need a frequency sweep, and you're going to need some test tones. That's really all you're going to do. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So if anybody doesn't know, I have a single 10-inch subwoofer and a sealed box. I just took my loading wall out right here. So this was kind of in front of it. And I'm going to be showing you the concept of how I got my sealed section to where I wanted it to be for my enclosure. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so I'm going to leave everything how it is back here. So whether you got a single 10 like I do, or you've got 15 18s in a big, huge fourth order in a van or whatever, you can use this concept. All right, so what I do is make sure I don't have a loading wall if I'm on a band pass. If you're on a band ported enclosure or sealed enclosure, you could just test it with how it is, and then later you can add wood. Of course, you can't remove wood after a certain limit, so you make sure you always start big and then shrink to where you find your output best. This is how you'll see as I go. So I'm not going to take these out, but my loading wall's out. So pretty much assume that this is just a sealed box in my enclosure. So the way I tune this is I actually have my sealed box by itself without a loading wall in my enclosure. I actually would take these out too if I was really doing it, but I'm doing some tweaks on my box. I'm not really worried about maximum output right now, but I would normally have no loading wall, and I would literally just go ahead and find my peak frequency and my highest output decibel wise medium volume with just the non-loaded wall sealed enclosure only in my enclosure. So you could do this with an enclosure, without an enclosure, but it's not going to be as optimal. Just finding your peak frequency in your vehicle. It's best to do it inside the enclosure, especially if you're a big ratio fourth order. All right, so let's go ahead and get this started. Any of the new viewers watching me, my vehicle's really gutted, so it's not the prettiest, but just use this concept for what I'm doing. So got my new amp back there, but the video, I'm not going to be putting any major power on it. Just going to use it at low volume like I always do. So whenever you do this test, you're also going to want to make sure you have an SPL meter. I use an SSA. You could use a Term Lab, a Magnum. There's a lot of other base meters out there, but it requires an actual investment to do this the proper way. So let me make sure I got my vehicle on, make sure everything's sealed up. Yeah. All right, so what I do is, let's just say my box is right where it is right now. So I'll go in here and actually get my device hooked up to a sweep. So I'm going to be using an iPod or whatever device you want to use. It can't be the same device as what's hooked up to your meter if you're doing a Bluetooth meter or a laptop or whatever. So that way you know your output's going to be different. And it's a different device so it doesn't get in the way. So what I do is I go in, I get my sweep. So I have sweeps here, 20 to 50, 30 to 60, 40, 70. Make sure I use the same sweep and the same volume level for every test. And I'll show you in a second. Let me open up my settings on my phone, make sure my Bluetooth's hooked up to my SSA meter that I'm using as my test on the glass here. It's pretty loud out with the birds if y'all can hear it. Sorry about that. All right. What I'm going to be doing is using a meter to find out where my peak is and then find out how loud the output is. So I highly recommend doing this with, like, I'd say half to 3/4 volume, but I always just do top volume 20 just because. Another thing you're going to want to do beforehand, so let me go do this. I forgot. I got to add this to the video for y'all to see. Sorry. I do this as I go for you guys to kind of see how I do this on video. So one thing you also want to do is make sure your low pass and your subsonic isn't going to cut out certain frequencies, because this will drastically affect your output. So you're going to want to have your subsonic all the way down and your low pass right around halfway or wherever you're comfortable with. Low pass isn't going to affect it as much as subsonic, because let's say my sealed enclosure might be at 22, 23 hertz, but if my subsonic's at 30 hertz, that's going to drastically cut that output out. So I'm going to turn my subsonic all the way down before I do my test. So I forgot to do that. Sorry if it's a little messy back here, but I got my little handy tool I use to turn this down. So I'm going to turn my subsonic all the way down. Keep my other one right where it is. So subsonic all the way down for this test. The reason you do that, and don't change your settings afterwards. So whether your gain is not right or not, which mine's not set correctly, just I'm doing low volume anyway, it won't matter. But you want to make sure you do the same test every time, so that way you know for sure how your output changes. All right, so it's in a sealed box. So what I'm going to do is go over here, make sure my volume's 20, go in and do my first sweep with the meter, make sure my bass knob's up. All right, and find out my peak, and I do a couple runs before I do changes. So I got my sweep. I'm going to do 20 to 50, and we'll find out how the sealed enclosure peaks at real quick. So another thing you want to consider is when you do this test, you could do sealed, you could do window down, door open, etc. Just make sure you do the same test every time. Otherwise, it's going to drastically affect your output difference, especially when you're doing tweaks to your sealed box. And what I mean by tweaks is, I'll explain after this. All right, so let's go ahead and do the sweep real quick. Reset 20 to 50. .22 hertz peak for my low peak right now. All right, so that shows you, of course, obviously it's tuned high, but that's getting my peak resonance on my higher tone. So if my frequency sweep didn't work out the best going up to 50 hertz, so that means that it's higher than that for my output. So what I'm going to do now is do a sweep from 30 to 60. Actually, I'm going to do 40 to 70. Okay, so I screenshot this one. So I know that I'm peaking at 52 hertz without a ported loading wall on my enclosure. So whether you got a single sub or a wall build behind your seat, you do this with the 4th order, 6th order, or whatever. And so this is where I'm peaking at currently. I did this at low volume, so I highly recommend doing a little higher volume if you can, but just make sure your voltage is the same. So what I'm doing now is, I know this is where my concept of my frequency peak is. I'm peaking at 52 hertz without a loading wall. So that means that my sealed enclosure right now is tuned near that with the concept of how my cabin space is at current state. So one more test before I end this video, and then I'll explain one more thing on what you would do next. So before I do my other test, I just put the window up now, so that way it'll affect my output. But I'm just going to show you how much drastic change that does. But what you need to do once you get this on your number is then you're going to go in to your enclosure. You're going to either remove some of your wood or you're going to add some of your wood. If you remove wood and you gain, that means your box is too small. If you add wood and you gain, that means your box is too big. So you can use this with subwoofer mount inverting as well. So if you invert your box subwoofers and you gain, then that means you need to invert your subwoofers to be louder. If you mount regular and gain, then that means that your box could be too big. I mean, there's a lot of variables. Another thing you want to consider with this is make sure your subwoofer is fully broken in, because what will happen is if your subwoofer is brand new when you do this test, your suspension's not as loose, so you're not going to get the output different. You're going to get a different output, say after 10 hours of playtime. Anyway, all right, that's enough of that. Hopefully this helps some of you guys. Now I'm going to do sealed real quick to show you all the difference in output. So 17.7, remember that? All right, 17.7, we're going to do another one. All right. right, so I know my vehicle really well, so I normally peak 2 to 3 frequencies below window down. So I dropped 2 hertz and my frequency went down about 0.7 dB. So depending on how you want to test your output, sealed, with the sealed means everything up, closed off, and then window down or door open, there's a lot of different variations, but make sure everything else is closed off, and there's your test and there's your results. So let me go to the back real quick and then I'll end this video. If y'all have any questions or concerns, or there's something that I might have said or explained that didn't make sense, just ask questions. I'm not the best at this, but I know this is how I tune my sealed box and my 4th order, and this is how you get the maximum output out of your sealed enclosure. The reason you're going to want to tune your sealed box this way, if you're a 4th order or just in general, is to get the most output out of your enclosure. You don't really know what to put your sealed section at because every system's different. But what I'll do next after that is I'll go in here and I will literally unmount my subwoofer. I will take my sub out, I would mount it regular, and then see the difference in output. If I gain putting my subwoofer mounted regular, then that means I'm louder with it mounted regular. And then after I mount regular, I will take my subwoofer out. I will actually add wood to it, and if I add wood and keep gaining, then I'm going to add more wood until I stop gaining. So you know your box is too big if you gain by mounting regular versus invert, or if you add, let's say you add 0.2 cubes to your box and you gain. So that means you need to keep shrinking your box till you don't gain anymore. There's the concept. This SPL concept I just explained will take you days or even months, depending on how serious you go with this, but you will drastically increase your output on not just on music and on the meter SPL wise, but also to ear if you really get into this, to the concept I'm explaining. And this concept can go for every bandpass enclosure, sealed box, ported, etc. Maximizing output based on how your enclosure space is utilized, cubic space wise. All right, that's the video. Thanks for watching. Sorry if it's messy, but use the concept. And I'll see you on the next video. Jacob Vial out.